Welcome to the weekly sermon from Church of Our Lord in Victoria. My name is Rob Zoe. Christians believe that God speaks to His people through His Word in the Bible, and we expect this Word to change us and draw us closer to Christ. That change might be dramatic or quiet. The main point is that God speaks to you in this time and draws you closer to Christ for growth, encouragement, and maturity. If you have any questions about the message today, please be in touch.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish? Psalm 22 begins, and we are immediately struck by pain and distress. These are horrifying words, and yet they are spoken to God. Words that hold together the experience of His absence and the truth that He is faithful. As Rob explored on Sunday, the first phase of this psalm is about pain. David, the writer, is surrounded and engulfed by trouble. His enemies are out to destroy him, and they are using every tool they have under their belts to inflict pain. But worse than trouble from his enemies, the deeper grief in this psalm comes from the sense of abandonment. These words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" are uncomfortable to hear. This is not a polite faith. It is a cry of protest, a complaint against God. But a cry of protest and anguish is still faith. Even in the complaint, there is still the confidence in the Lord as my God, holding on to Him without being able to see if and when this will be resolved. Alongside the pain, the first verse also gives voice to the intimacy between the two parties, the psalmist and Yahweh. You cannot be abandoned by someone who you have no relationship with or who has no responsibility for you. It is clear that the psalmist has a close relationship with Yahweh and knows that God has promised to be faithful. And so when God does not answer, or does not answer in the way the psalmist hopes, the confusion and distress are at the forefront. Verse 2 shows us the urgency of the situation. He is crying out day and night, and yet still no answer comes. Still, he cannot find rest or peace. What a different experience this is from the next psalm, Psalm 23, where the psalmist describes God leading him beside still waters and restoring the soul. My God, why have you forsaken me? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. In periods and seasons of deep pain in our lives, we are not required to have a polite faith. With the Psalms as our prayer book, we are able to question, to acknowledge our fears, and give voice to our experiences. When it feels like God has abandoned us, like He is far from us, we see in Psalm 22 that we are given permission to pray and to voice our sense of abandonment. The psalmist moves from protest to bringing to mind God's past faithfulness. He clings to the story of his people, the great redemption story of Israel, where God heard the cries of his people in Egypt, rescued them from slavery, and brought them into the promised land. David knows the Lord's faithfulness. And he contrasts this with his current experience. His ancestors cried out, and God not only heard them, but answered and acted. They weren't disappointed, as David is now. Their trust was vindicated. So why is God silent now? Psalm 22 expresses that tension of faith that many of us feel. The Lord is known to be faithful. We have read the stories, heard the testimonies, and experienced his closeness. He has and does act on behalf of his people. And yet here, God is experienced as absent, silent, not hearing our cries, seeing our distress, or acting on our behalf. Sometimes remembering God's faithfulness, hearing testimonies of God's closeness or action in difficult times encourages us, lifts our faith. But at other times, as the psalmist seems to feel here, remembering God's past faithfulness makes the present situation that more confusing, that much more harder to bear as the question continues, why am I not being rescued at this present moment? In verses 6 to 8, the psalmist continues to expose their pain to the Lord. The injury, insults, and mockery from their enemies surround him. He is in the darkest valley, calling himself a worm, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. He is highlighting how desperate his situation is. He feels degraded, dehumanized by his enemies, and by the Lord's apparent silence. He feels insignificant, subhuman, like he is meant for destruction. This is a horrendous experience to find yourself in. We are not told why he is being scorned or despised, or what the shame he is experiencing is, but it isn't hard for us to imagine. Even today, people experience shame and stigma for conditions or situations which they aren't responsible for, but are still suffering through. Or perhaps this is a shame of David's own making. Maybe the recognition of his sin has struck him to the core, and the people are following suit in their naming and shaming of his sin. The psalmist's shame is added to as his enemies ridicule him for depending on Yahweh. Their hearts are so hardened that they not only degrade him to less than human, but they mock him, thinking it foolish, stupid, even absurd or impossible that God would look upon him and think him worthy of listening to or saving. Do we recognize some of that same hardness in ourselves? In a world where people are dehumanized through war, exploitation, through the misuse of power, how do we respond when God seems absent? What do we do when trust in God seems weak, ineffective, even naive? And in those moments, do we begin to measure people differently, treating some as less worthy of compassion or dignity, or even of being saved? And so the mocking of God's care from David's enemies stings all the more in the darkness of silence. In verses 9 to 10, we are brought back again to memories of faithfulness and goodness. This time is not God's faithfulness to the ancestors, but his faithfulness to the one praying. The psalmist reminds God of his utter reliance and dependence on him, even from the beginning of life, and how important his presence and closeness is for life itself. David describes Yahweh as a midwife, delivering him safely into his mother's arms. You made me trust in you. How could the psalmist not trust in the Lord? Even in his mother's womb, the Lord has been his God. This is the dependency, the intimacy, the trust that the psalmist has, because this is the care and protection that the Lord has shown. Although we know, like ours, David's trust, obedience, faithfulness has greatly wavered at times. We see David contrasting again past and present circumstances. The Lord was faithful, caring for, delivering him safely, even while he was in his mother's womb, yet to be born. In verse 11, the end of our passage today, but it is the first petition heard in Psalm 22. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. What David truly desires is not just for God to act, although he does want that, but to experience the closeness and relationship that he once had. The closeness like that of a newborn baby and his mother, the closeness of one who brings rest and restoration to the soul. Psalm 22 is filled with pain and anguish and the seeming absence of a faithful God. It holds this tension of faith that many experience during seasons of personal hardship, but also as we look at the wider world. We know God's past faithfulness, but why at this moment does he seem silent? The psalm starts in despair, but as we heard from Rob on Sunday, it does not end that way. Later in verse 24, we hear the psalmist say, "For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help." The psalm refuses to resolve this tension of faith quickly. In this moment of suffering, God does feel distant. The psalmist cries out and hears no answer. The silence is real. And yet somehow the psalmist also holds on to the conviction that this is not the final truth about God. The Lord does in fact answer his cries. He does not look indifferently at his suffering. Though others may despise him, the Lord does not. Hanging on the cross in searing pain, Jesus chooses Psalm 22 to pray as he dies. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Psalm 22 not only expresses David's experience, but it finds its fullest expression in the experience of Jesus' betrayal and death. He is living the deepest reality of the psalm and fulfilling it. He doesn't skip to verse 24 or the end of the psalm, where we see life and praise and feasting, or where it is proclaimed he has done it. No, he enters into the pain, the humiliation, the silence. He takes up the suffering, the shame, the attack of enemies. Jesus experiences the betrayal of a friend. Many of his friends forsake him. Those whom Jesus came to seek and save mock him and torture him and call for his execution. On Thursday, in anguish, he cries out to the Father to take this cup of suffering from him. But he is not rescued from this trouble. In the Gospels, we hear how the people witnessing Jesus' crucifixion hurled insults at him and mocked him. They speak the words of the enemies in Psalm 22. He saved others, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. They mock Jesus' unwavering trust in the Lord. And the irony is that it is not that Jesus could not save himself, but that he chose not to. Not because he lacked power, but because he chose sacrifice. He chose love of the other. He does not rescue himself from his enemies, because his enemies are the very ones he came to rescue. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus, we see, enters into and bears the anguish of our broken relationship with God, not because of God's unfaithfulness, but because of ours. This separateness from God results in death. It is only being reunited with God that we can live. Jesus truly enters into our world of death and despair. Out of love for us, he takes on our humanity. And so he suffers pain because we suffer and inflict pain. He dies because we are dying. On the cross, he is treated as a rebel, dying a rebel's death, not because he is a rebel, but because we are. He takes upon himself the weight and consequences of our rebellion against God. The religious leaders and bystanders look upon Jesus hanging on the cross as the ultimate failure. Crucifixion was not only meant to be horrendously painful, but the ultimate humiliation. He is to them but a worm, scorned and despised. And in their eyes, their purposes have been achieved. This is what they wanted: to silence him, to stop him, to bring an end to his work. And yet this is no failure. This is the Holy One, the one Israel praises, enthroned on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? The horrifying cry of the Son of God. On the cross, we see that it is God who abandons, but is also abandoned for the love of humanity. Not because he turns away in indifference, but because he chooses to enter into that place of abandonment. Jesus became sin, even though he knew no sin, for us. At the cross, we see God the Father not sparing his Son out of love for us, while God the Son gives himself freely, also out of love. He does not, he will not, he refuses to abandon us to sin and death. The Lord does not forsake the world. He does not forsake us, but he takes on the full weight of our sin, our suffering, our death. What looks like foolishness is in fact the power and wisdom of God. This is not defeat. This is not failure. This is the Holy One, the one Israel praises, enthroned even here on the cross. In this moment where God seems most absent, his love is most present.